Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I am pleased to talk you through all of the books that I finished in June. June was an exceptionally good reading month for me, despite the fact that it was incredibly busy and very stressful. Maybe that's why, I don't know. First off, I'd like to start with a book that I mentioned at the end of my May wrap-up, which is Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. This is, as I mentioned in numerous other videos, the story of Ariadne from Greek mythology, retold from her perspective before, during, and after she is abandoned by Theseus. I adored this book. It is very much in the same vein as Madeline Miller's work, so if you enjoyed The Song of Achilles or Circe, definitely pick this up. What I didn't expect was to hear so much from her sister Phaedra as well. First of all, I wasn't aware that Phaedra was her sister, so that was a pleasant surprise. But I loved that the two women's stories were contrasted and shown how similar they were, even though they were put in very different positions by the time they were adults. I highly encourage anyone to pick this up, especially if you are at all interested in Greek mythology. Next, for my monthly classic, I read Rilla of Ingleside by L.M. Montgomery. So I can now say that I have officially finished the Anne of Green Gables series, and I am so glad that I did. You do start to hear from Anne less and less as the story continues and her children grow older. But I would say that Rilla is a similar kind of character to Anne. No one could ever be exactly like Anne, but Rilla is very similar. And you get to watch her grow up very quickly, as she has to, when the First World War breaks out, and you see all of the effects that it has on her life. And what I couldn't help noticing as I read it, and as I watched various vlogs and thoughts come in from Carolyn Marie Reeds and Emmy and their reading of War and Peace, is that L.M. Montgomery does a similar thing in that you get to see war and peace not just in terms of war going on and then peace on the home front, but how there are elements of both in each of those places. There are moments of peace that characters find who are on the front lines, and there are many times when Rilla has to fight and wage wars in order for various things to happen at home. So while Anne of Green Gables and indeed Anne of the Island are my two favorites, this one is definitely up there with my favorites as well. And I can totally see why Megan the Story Girl loves it so much. Next, for my nonfiction this month, I read A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. I have read two of Virginia Woolf's novels and gotten on middlingly with them, but I had heard wonderful things about this essay, or rather this series of essays. Is it an elongated essay? I'm not entirely sure what to call it. But I did very much enjoy it. It talks about ostensibly how women need a space of their own and an income of their own in order to be creative and to write fiction. But in true Virginia Woolf fashion, it covers so much more than just those issues. And what I found striking is that she managed to maintain some of her typical writing style. Very flowy, not quite stream of consciousness, but very close, while managing to actually hold me the whole time, and I was completely clear on what point she was making every step of the way. I very much enjoyed it, and it has made me think a little bit more kindly of her. And lastly, for my Spanish book of the month, a new challenge that I have set for myself, I read the experimental, historical, long-form poem Juana la Primera, or Juana the First, by Anna Arsumanian. This is a bilingual edition, so even if you do not speak Spanish, you can still read it if you are an English speaker. The English is in the front half of the book and the Spanish is in the back half. And the English was translated by Gabriel Amor. And it tells the story of Juana I, who was Queen of Spain, and indeed Catherine of Aragon's sister, both of them being daughters of Ferdinand and Isabella. Very few people actually talk about Juana, though, as she was deemed mad later in life. This was due to a number of circumstances, namely the restrictions put on her by being a woman, and her husband Felipe of Belgium's emotional abuse of her. And so this book's aim is to give Juana a voice that she did not previously have. I loved the idea of that, and I loved the premise, but I felt like it could have been done in a much shorter amount of time. It would have been far more impactful as a poem and not as 76 pages exploring the same themes in very abstract terms. I was very proud of myself that I was able to recognize most of the vocabulary used. I just didn't quite enjoy the content as much as I had hoped. So this bodes well for the future when I start reading novels. Next, I read just a couple of novels that I felt like reading. The first is The Paper and Heart Society, Bookishly Ever After by Lucy Powery. Lucy is herself a booktuber. She focuses on historical fiction and classics, and I love her for that. And this is the last book in the Paper and Hearts Society trilogy. So the stories all follow a group of friends who call themselves the Paper and Heart Society. And they are their own teen book club. They each have their own niche authors that they enjoy and their own niche quirks and characteristics. And in each book they have a lot of fun together while tackling some very real and thus seemingly small but very, very important issues in their lives. So this third book mainly focuses on Ed. The first one focuses on Tabby and the second on Olivia. I love each of these books. They are very firmly YA, leaning towards middle grade, but definitely for a slightly older audience. They are quick reads, they are sweet, they are cozy, they are funny, they are interesting, so I hesitate to call them book candy. Maybe book cake might be better, because you can add fruit to a cake and sometimes call it healthy, or healthier. That's kind of what this feels like as compared to book candy. I very much enjoyed it, and it was exactly what I needed at the time. Next, I read An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. I had read Silver Sparrow by Tayari back in January, but I knew this one had won a bunch of awards since, so I was intrigued to see how I liked it. I loved it even more. It is definitely worth the hype. It's the story of a newly married Black couple, Celestial and Roy, living in the American South. Most of the action takes place in either Louisiana or Atlanta, Georgia. And I thought this was a historical novel. It's not. It's very much modern. Definitely taking place sometime within my lifetime. They are both successful business people living a very good life, but one night they stay in a motel and they have an argument. So to cool off, Roy goes out to get some ice. While he's out there, he discovers a white woman with a broken arm, shoulder, something like that. So she's struggling with her bags. So he does the right thing. He helps her with her bags, helps her into her room, makes sure she's comfortable, and then he leaves. Well, later that night, she is attacked in her room and she accuses Roy. Now, we know from the outset that he didn't do it, but he's convicted anyway. And so this novel tracks both how he and Celestial got to this point, as well as what happens to their marriage during and after his imprisonment. This book is gripping, it is fascinating. Every single character is so fully fleshed out. Their perspectives are beautiful and heartbreaking. The lyrical writing is wonderful. I truly loved this novel, and I can't wait to see what Tayari Jones does next. I also read another Shakespeare play for my project to read all of Shakespeare's works. This month was Troilus and Cressida, and there is a whole separate video about that in my channel, which means I have 4 plays left to read, which means I am definitely on my way to achieving my goal of reading all of them by the end of the year. Next, I started Frog Music by Emma Donoghue. This is the first of Emma Donoghue's historical fiction that I've read, and it has definitely made me want to read more. I loved this book. It's the story of Blanche, who is a burlesque dancer in San Francisco in 1876. And within the first few pages of the novel, her friend Jenny is shot right next to her. So the rest of the book then takes you through 2 perspectives. First, the lead up to the shooting, how she and Jenny met, how Jenny's arrival affected her relationship with her husband and his friend Ernest, and the aftermath as Blanche tries to solve Jenny's murder. I found this gripping, exciting, fantastically written. I almost can't put into words how much I enjoyed it. It does get dark, and it moves quickly all the way to the end, which is perhaps one of my quibbles, is that the ending felt like it wrapped up a bit too quickly and neatly. The other is that it does take a moment to get used to the time switches. Emma Donoghue doesn't always warn you that you are in a different period of time, that you are switching from the present to the past, because they had only known each other for a short amount of time, Blanche and Jenny, that is. So it's not like she can use the marker of 2 years ago. No, this all takes place within a short amount of time. But once you get used to the time jumps, it is exhilarating from beginning to end. Finally, the last book that I read this month, that I finished last night in fact, is Islands of Mercy by Rose Tremaine. This is the story, based on the back, it's the story of 2 people. One is of Jane Adine, who is known as the Angel of the Baths. She is a nurse with incredible healing powers in Victorian Bath, but she is torn between marrying one of her father's older colleagues, older than Jane anyway, and her newly discovered relationship with another woman. It is also the story of Sir Ralph Savage, who has become a Raja in Borneo and is trying to navigate the tricky line between establishing a prosperous estate in Borneo and enjoying all of the natural beauty that it has to offer. And somehow these 2 stories intertwine. I have to say, I didn't enjoy this book as much as I hoped that I would. It is very slow, which I can appreciate, but it is so slow that the action really doesn't pick up until a third to halfway through the novel. And secondly, those 2 stories do intertwine, but not directly. There are many other characters who float in and out of Sir Ralph and Jane's lives that we meet almost before we meet the 2 of them, who connect the 2 of them. So they do intertwine, but it's very indirectly. And while each of their storylines, meaning all of the characters, are very good and intriguing, I wish that they had been more directly intertwined the way the premise promised me that they would. So overall, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't my favorite read. So there you have it. Those are all the books that I read in June. Let me know down below if you have any further questions about any of them, or indeed if you read a fantastic book this past month that you think I would really enjoy. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.